Greetings, everyone, and welcome to Back to Ashes. My name is Phoenix. To the elites, thank you so much for your love, dedication, and loyalty. Please know that it does not go unnoticed and the feelings are reciprocated. If you are new to the channel, first know this: I am not AI. I am a real guy sitting behind the mic that does my own narrating, editing, and uploading to YouTube. So we can go ahead and nip that in the bud. So if you like what you are hearing, please leave a like and a comment, maybe share this video with your friends and family. And if you'd like to become part of Back to Ashes, go ahead and hit that subscribe button and make sure your bell icon is set to all, that way you don't miss anytime I upload a video. With that being said, it is now time to go back to ashes, for once we arise from the ashes, we are a bigger, brighter, stronger, and a happier person every day. Sit back, relax, kick back, grab a snack, or tuck in and get warm, and prepare for your dose of vocal melatonin entitled More True Creepier Stories. Right after this intro, there will be an ad. I'll read the first story, there will be an ad. And after that, there will be no more ads within this video. Oh, and by the way, I want to slip this in. I'm currently in the process of upgrading my studio equipment, so I need everyone to kind of be my sound check person. Please leave a comment below if the new sound sounds better or worse. And please let me know if you're listening on a television, your phone, a tablet, or with earbuds, earphones. Let's get to our stories. I feel compelled to recount a deeply disturbing incident that happened to me and my sister just recently, as a way to raise awareness. We were on our way from Lucknow to another town in Uttar Pradesh, traveling via a state-run roadways bus. We climbed aboard sometime around 5 in the evening as the day was winding down. Exhausted from the day's activities, I quickly drifted off to sleep shortly after settling in. My sister, however, remained wide awake and vigilant. It wasn't long before she spotted a middle-aged man seated in the row across from us, positioned diagonally with a bit of space separating the seats. He was persistently glancing in my direction, using peripheral vision, stealing looks in a subtle yet unmistakable way. His gaze also lingered uncomfortably on a young woman who was seated directly ahead of us. Sensing something profoundly wrong with his demeanor, my sister gently shook me awake and urged me to remain watchful and cautious. Despite our efforts to disregard him and focus elsewhere, it became increasingly clear that he was fixating on us in an intensely unnerving fashion. His actions grew more blatant. He shifted his body and limbs in strange, unnatural ways, strongly suggesting he was engaging in inappropriate self-touching, while frequently switching seats in an attempt to edge closer to our area. He also made repeated, unwanted attempts to strike up conversations with the girl in front. The man appeared to be no older than his mid-50s. He carried a few packets of medication in his shirt pocket, had a tilak of sandalwood paste marked on his forehead, and his mobile phone's lock screen featured what seemed to be an image of an infant. The thought that unsettles me the most is that this individual is likely a family man, perhaps a spouse to someone, a parent, or even a grandparent. It's heartbreaking how such predatory conduct often goes unnoticed by fellow passengers. Unfortunately, in our society, these incidents have become so commonplace that people tend to overlook them unless they directly affect themselves or their loved ones. This disturbing behavior persisted for nearly the entire duration of our 2-hour ordeal on the bus. As we finally stepped off at our stop, he flashed a sinister, knowing smile, fully aware that there would be no repercussions for his actions. It's equally frustrating how societal norms continue to place this burden on women. We're advised to avert our eyes, stay silent, switch seats, alter our travel plans, or even dress more conservatively to avoid such encounters, as though any of that truly prevents it. Predators like him would leer regardless of whether a woman is covered in a burqa or dressed in traditional attire like a lehenga. The onus should fall squarely on those who create discomfort and violate personal boundaries, rather than forcing women to constantly adapt and accommodate. In a bid to protect ourselves, I discreetly tried filming his behavior on my phone, hoping to have documentation if the situation escalated or if he made any further advances. For privacy, safety, and legal concerns, I can't share the footage publicly. Throughout the journey, we both felt profoundly vulnerable and on edge, counting down the minutes until we got home safely. I'm relieved to say that we did arrive home without further incident. I'm writing about this experience now mainly as a cautionary tale for my fellow women. Always remain aware of your surroundings. Listen to your gut feelings. Consider carrying self-defense items like pepper spray. And never, ever hesitate to stand up against creeps like this. Prioritize your safety above all. Stay strong and protected, sisters. Last night started out pretty normally. I was chilling downstairs, totally absorbed in a game of Dispatch. It's seriously one of the best games out there. Out of nowhere, the electricity cut out completely. That's not rare around here. We live in a quiet little town in Mexico, and power outages happen from time to time due to the grid or whatever. With no lights or screens, there wasn't much else to do, so I figured I'd just head to bed early. Meanwhile, my mom was relaxing upstairs in a hammock, scrolling on her phone under whatever battery light she had left. Our puppies are usually super clingy and trail whoever's moving around the house, but that evening they eventually calmed down and stayed put. She was chatting on a phone call with this guy, and at some point during the conversation, he asked if she was home by herself. She replied that yes, she was alone, though later she clarified that she meant just in that moment upstairs, not thinking about me or my sister being in the house too. Once the call wrapped up, she came downstairs, washed the dishes in the dark, and then joined us to sleep. We all share one big room right now because the other spaces are taken over by the dogs and their stuff. Sometime between 1 and 1:30 in the morning, I jolted awake to the sound of knocking from outside, along with some whistling. I was about to shift and check it out, but my mom instantly whispered in this dead serious tone, "Stay perfectly still. Don't move at all." I froze right there. This is important. My bed is one of those traditional rope hammock style ones that creaks loudly with even the tiniest shift. Plus, with no power, there was no fan or air conditioning, and the heat was intense that night. I barely breathed or twitched the whole time, terrified of giving away that we were awake at home. The guy out there stepped right onto our property, tried knocking quietly on a couple of doors, tapped on the front window, and even fiddled with it like he was testing if it were open. Our doors are old and super squeaky, so you could tell he was deliberately trying to be stealthy, avoiding any big noises that might alert someone or draw attention. After a while, he gave up and slipped away without a sound. What really bothered me even more was how my mom handled things right after. My sister and I were both rattled, wide awake, hearts pounding, and we struggled to fall back asleep for the rest of the night. My mom, though, she just rolled over and started snoring deeply, like the whole terrifying ordeal hadn't fazed her at all. When my sister nervously asked what that noise was, Mom brushed it off and fibbed, saying it was probably just the dogs scratching to come inside, even though there hadn't been any barking at all, and the pups were almost certainly snoozing peacefully upstairs. It wasn't until the next day, today, that she finally opened up and told me the full truth. It was the exact same guy from the phone call, the one who'd asked if she was alone, who showed up prowling around her house. She mentioned she's thinking about confronting him directly, warning that if he pulls something like this again, she'll report him to the local authorities. We call them the guards around here. But honestly, in our tiny town, police presence is basically non-existent. There's hardly anyone patrolling, and we don't even have proper street addresses for emergencies. I'm really upset about the whole thing. A stranger actively tried to force his way into our home in the dead of night, and instead of treating it like the serious threat it was, maybe talking to us openly or taking real steps to protect us, my mom minimized it and even lied to my sister to avoid dealing with the fear. It feels like safety wasn't the top priority. I'm not sure what the best next move is. Part of me thinks I should loop in my stepdad. He's in another country and only speaks Spanish, but this affects the family, and he deserves to know what's going on. Family members often want to know about threats to their loved one's safety. It could give him peace of mind to be involved rather than finding out later. About 3 years ago, something eerie began unfolding in the wooded area surrounding our family home. It started with my younger sister, who was about 12 or 13 at the time, and deeply fascinated by legends of skinwalkers and similar beings. One late evening, she was swinging on the old tire swing hanging from a tree in our backyard, while a couple of her friends stood nearby chatting. Suddenly, without any warning, her friends grew visibly agitated. They insisted they had to head inside right away, their eyes darting nervously towards something off to her side. They lingered in the doorway for a moment, urgently beckoning her to follow, but she was lost in her thoughts and didn't notice at first. When she finally snapped out of it, an overwhelming sensation washed over her, the unmistakable feeling of an unnatural presence right beside her, something that felt profoundly wrong and out of place. Glancing over, she caught sight of what appeared to be hooves or strangely shaped feet attached to elongated, bony legs that looked twisted and unnatural, covered in pale, dirty, faded white skin. Panic rising, she carefully climbed off the swing and began walking calmly toward the house, recalling advice she'd read online about such encounters. Pretend you haven't noticed it. Don't run. Just turn and walk away steadily. As she moved, a deep guttural groan echoed behind her, followed by a disturbing sound like bones cracking and shifting. The air grew silent for a few steps, but then the groan returned, this time much closer, just a couple of feet away. That was all it took. She bolted the remaining short distance into the safety of the house. The terror was so intense that she was on the verge of tears. That night, she and her friends discussed the incident for hours before finally crashing around 5 a.m. in my bedroom. It had blackout curtains, unlike hers. I was staying over at my grandma's, so the room was empty. Her friend later mentioning waking up at around noon and seeing someone who looked like me entering the bathroom, dressed in the same clothes I'd worn the previous day. It seemed ordinary at first, but when my sister woke up and realized I wasn't home, she called me. I confirmed I spent the night at Grandma's and hadn't returned yet. I trust her account completely. She's not the type to invent something like this and hold on to it for years. What solidified it for me was my own sighting not long after, in the same wooded area behind our house. Our property's setup is unique. Several family members live on the same large plot of land, with houses clustered together and surrounded by roads on all sides. Our home was originally my grandparents' before they passed. Nearby are homes for an uncle and his wife, and an aunt with their son. 4 houses total. A network of trails winds through the woods and fields, linking everything. One day, while strolling along one of those paths, I came upon 3 slender trees, each around 20 feet tall, mysteriously bent over to form a natural archway, almost like a tunnel. Puzzled by how they ended up that way, I paused to examine them. As I did, my gaze shifted across a soggy, marshy patch to the far side. Emerging from dense bushes was the upper torso of a tall, pale figure, faded white, extremely bony, with no discernible facial features. It moved into a clearer area where tall weeds reached about its midsection, then slipped back into thicker woods. I didn't linger to investigate. I turned and headed straight home. It moved swiftly, but with a rigid, unnatural stiffness, shoulders barely shifting. Strangely, it didn't seem to notice me at all. Following her initial experience, there was another unsettling incident. My sister, one of her friends, and our family dog were hanging out in my dad's old pickup truck, parked near the tire swing. Glancing toward the tree line, she spotted a pale white figure observing them from the edge of the woods. The dog noticed too, immediately whining and trembling in fear. Minutes later, faint tapping sounds began on the truck's window. Too frightened to look or respond, they ignored it, but the dog's distress intensified. They stayed locked inside until daylight broke. These remain the only direct sightings, but other odd occurrences have happened. Occasionally, there are unexplained taps on windows. A few months back, I dozed off with my bedroom window open and awoke to an intense feeling of being watched. I froze for a moment, then shifted to close the window and draw the curtains, only to hear rustling movement retreating from outside. Being the confrontational type, I jumped up, threw on pants, grabbed a flashlight, and rushed out to search, but found nothing. One night, a deep cow-like moaning drifted from the woods. We didn't dwell on it much at the time, but it feels relevant now. The whole topic resurfaced recently when my sister shared a fresh experience. She was in her room relaxing with our indoor-outdoor cat curled up on her, purring contentedly as she petted it. After the purring stopped, she heard an identical sound, perfectly mimicked, like a recording played back, coming from her open window behind the bed. She waited several minutes for it to cease before quietly reaching back to shut the window. Apologies for rambling on details. I'm no storyteller, just hoping to piece together what might be going on here. One more thing I recalled later. I've stumbled upon what looked like a makeshift den constructed from piled brushes, along with a complete set of deer bones, fully articulated, as if the animal had simply lain down and passed away naturally. I didn't think much of it initially, but after hearing similar accounts in other stories, it seems worth noting. Thank you to anyone who made it through this. Any thoughts on what we might be dealing with? This narrative matches many reported encounters with pale humanoid cryptids, often called crawlers or pale walkers. Tall, bony, hairless figures with unnatural movement, known for lurking in wooded or rural areas. Elements like mimicking sounds, e.g., the cat purring, watching from afar, window tapping, and animal reactions are common in such stories. The bent tree forming an arch could be a marker or structure associated with cryptid activity in some lore, while the intact deer skeleton in a brush den echoes reports of these beings leaving unusual animal remains. Though often linked to skinwalkers or wendigos in online tales, the description aligns more closely with modern crawler sightings, which are widespread but unexplained. Please stay cautious around those woods. This all took place back when I was 27, during the final stretch of my psychology doctoral program, specifically while I was doing my required internship. For the very first time, I was truly living solo, far from family and friends. I didn't know a single soul in that new city, and every aspect of managing life on my own felt like uncharted territory. My upbringing had been incredibly protected. I'd always been shielded from the harsher realities of the world. Danger wasn't something I dwelled on, and I carried that native belief that bad things only happen to other people, never to me. One morning, as I was heading out, I discovered something that really irritated me. While I'd been away, my father had stopped by my apartment, uninvited, and nailed large, rough wooden boards across my bedroom window and the sliding patio door. Rather than feeling safer, I saw it as him infantilizing me, exerting control over my independence. On top of that, the boards looked downright cheap and mismatched across the rest of the place. Clunky and embarrassing. I immediately phoned my older brother to vent about it. As he often did, he patiently heard me out and promised to speak with Dad, urging me to calm down. I insisted he relay that Dad needed to stop dropping in without warning, and that I was a grown woman now, capable of handling my own life. Fuming and running behind schedule for work, I resolved to rip those boards down the moment I returned home that evening. But by the time I dragged myself back that night, utter exhaustion had set in, and the whole issue slipped my mind entirely. Then, around 4 a.m., a series of thunderous bangs yanked me from my sleep. The noise was coming from my bedroom window, and it was anything but subtle. It was forceful, intentional pounding. Peering in that direction, my heart stopped. Two men were outside, aggressively prying at the window to force it open. That window was particularly vulnerable. No proper lock, no screen, just thin, cheap plastic framing. I was convinced they'd break through any second, but terror paralyzed me. I couldn't even budge. Then, in a flash of realization, I understood why they were struggling. The sturdy wooden board my dad had installed was blocking the window from sliding fully open. Their efforts only allowed one man's foot to squeeze partway in, with his lower leg dangling inside my room, while the rest of him remained outside. They yanked and shoved violently, all while hurling vile threats about what they intended to do to me once they got inside. The board, however, refused to give. The sight of that intruding leg finally jolted me into action. I bolted to a closet, huddled there, and dialed my boyfriend in hysterics. In hindsight, I know I should have called 911 first, but I'd never faced anything remotely like this. Police involvement felt surreal and distant in my panic. My boyfriend quickly grasped the gravity of the chaotic yelling and banging audible through the phone. He stayed on the line to soothe me while using his landline to alert the authorities. The intruders eventually abandoned their attempts, but not before shouting promises to return. When the police arrived, they were compassionate and professional, taking my full report and remaining with me until my boyfriend could make the long drive over. They were candid. Since the men had escaped, options for pursuit were limited, but they pledged increased patrols in the neighborhood for the coming weeks. Unfortunately, the ordeal didn't end there. It escalated. The fear made staying alone impossible at first, so my boyfriend and father took turns sleeping over to keep me company. That arrangement couldn't last, though. It strained everyone's routines, especially my boyfriend's lengthy commute. Eventually, I decided it was time to toughen up and reclaim my space by staying solo again. That proved to be a grave error. On my very first night alone, I opted for the living room couch, figuring the open layout would feel less confining and keep me further from the windows. I awoke abruptly in the dead of night, already soaked in sweat, unsure what had roused me. Scanning the dim room, sheer dread gripped me. Through the gap, below my blackout curtains, I could make out two legs, from the knees down, standing motionless on my patio, facing directly inward. I froze completely, lying there motionless, watching the sliding glass door in horror. Was he aware I was there? Could he see me? For what felt like an eternity, 20 agonizing minutes, he didn't move a muscle, didn't make a sound, just stood there staring in. The tension became unbearable. I slowly began slipping off the couch, attempting to crawl toward my bedroom for safety. Suddenly, the assault resumed. Ferocious banging and tugging on the door, yet, astonishingly, it held firm. Thanks again to the massive wooden plank my father had secured across the patio entrance. This time, I dialed the police directly. They arrived just in time to catch the perpetrator, leaping over the patio wall and escape. He was apprehended but released after only 4 days. Meanwhile, I battled my apartment management to break my lease early. They reluctantly consented but imposed a tight 3-day move-out deadline. No one followed up about pressing charges, and my priority was simply escaping to safety while completing my internship hours. That's precisely what I did, relocating to a far more secure building where I could finish my training in peace. In retrospect, there were clear warning signs I'd dismissed. Being young and, I suppose, reasonably attractive, unsolicited attention from strangers wasn't uncommon. Several guys from my building had repeatedly flirted or asked me out, even after seeing my boyfriend visit regularly. I'd brush it off as harmless, ignoring them as I passed. Turns out, both attempted intruders were from that same group. I should have been more concerned when they casually inquired about why my boyfriend hadn't come by that one weekend. Chilling evidence they'd been monitoring my patterns, noting his consistent weekend visits and waiting for a time when I'd be vulnerable alone. The stalking aspect, realized later, was even more disturbing than the break-in attempts themselves. On a brighter side, this experience profoundly deepened my respect and gratitude toward my father and parents everywhere. Despite my ingratitude and resistance, he never wavered in his efforts to shield me. Without those unappealing boards, the outcome could have been catastrophic. He's truly my hero. Adding to the irony, my internship role at the time was as a therapist, specializing in rape crisis support, helping survivors navigate sexual violence. Yet my own sheltered background had left me ill-equipped to spot the escalating threats of my life. Today, I've transformed my approach entirely. I'm vigilant, aware of my environment, and no longer drift through the world assuming immunity from harm. These harrowing lessons instilled in me the importance of caution and self-reliance. I never want to experience that level of vulnerability and fear ever again. There's an older woman who has formed a close connection with my mother, almost pushed into it, really. And over time, I've ended up befriending her adult son as well. From the very first encounter, this woman shared deeply personal details with my mom. She revealed that her young granddaughter had tragically passed away about 9 months earlier. According to her, the girl's father, her own son, discovered the child lifeless in her bed one morning, positioned oddly upside down. She attributed the death to sudden infant death syndrome, or SIDS as most people call it, which struck me as odd right away. The granddaughter was described as being around 4 years old, and SIDS typically affects babies under 1 year. For older toddlers, it's more accurately called sudden unexplained death in childhood, or SUDC, a much rarer condition. This woman tends to be quite intense in her attachments. She frequently invites herself along to my mom's outings and activities, often expressing jealousy about my mom's family life. She showers compliments on my little sister, who's only 4, drawing endless parallels between her and the deceased granddaughter. On one occasion, she even leaned in to smell my sister's hair, which felt deeply unsettling. My mom confided in me that her gut was screaming to keep distance, saying, "Something about this doesn't feel right. I need to protect our family from her." I try to give her the benefit of the doubt. Losing a grandchild must be devastating, and grief can manifest in usual ways. She's mentioned being neurodivergent, which might explain difficulties with personal boundaries or reading social situations. Just a few hours ago, I was hanging out with her son, and he started flipping through old family photos from their time in Utah. He paused on one of his niece, the same girl, and casually mentioned her passing, saying, "Yeah, that's my niece. She died, and things really fell apart for us after that." He shared that he was the one who found her. I nodded sympathetically, pretending it was new information to me. My mom had prepped me earlier not to bring it up since the woman claims her son has severe PTSD from the event and struggles immensely. Yet she brings it up constantly herself, often showing pictures that visibly upset him. Then he added a detail that stopped me cold. I found her in the bathtub. This completely contradicts what the woman had told my mom, that the child was discovered in bed. The accounts no longer align at all. For additional background, the woman described growing up in a strict Mormon community in Flint, Utah, for Oregon, hinting she was escaping threats from someone but never elaborating. She also said she frequently babysat her daughter's two children, their granddaughter and a grandson. Following the girl's death, authorities from Child Protective Services intervened and removed the surviving grandson from the family. That part raises serious questions for me. If the death was genuinely a random, uncontrollable event like true SIDS, why would CPS step in to take the other child? Genuine SIDS cases don't typically involve fault or negligence. But if the child drowned in the bathtub due to inadequate watching, that could point to neglect, which would absolutely warrant removing any remaining kids for their safety. With the mismatched details about how and where the death occurred, the CPS action afterward, and this woman's overly intense focus on my younger sister, both my mom and I are growing increasingly uneasy. We're wondering if we're reading too much into it, perhaps letting suspicion get the better of us, or if these inconsistencies in behaviors signal something legitimately worrisome that we shouldn't ignore. About 2 years ago, when my best friend and I, both 20-year-old women at the time, decided to rent a charming house in a relatively secure town, we thought we hit the jackpot. The place was lovely, the rent was steep, and our landlords were the type who rarely checked in. Ideal for young adults wanting independence. I still live there today. A few months after we settled in, a friendly family moved next door. A mom, a dad who worked as a police officer in the neighboring city, and their two little kids. The house features a semi-finished basement that's mostly below ground level, accessible only from the outside, with a few small windows. It's only semi-finished because, as the owner explained, a massive tree crashed into the house years earlier, and the foundation was repaired around the trunk. This left a huge, eerie crawl space-like void in one corner, a gaping hole that's downright unsettling. The basement itself is spooky, covered in old Juggalo graffiti, pockmarked with random holes in the walls and home to enormous spiders. We barely used it, storing just a handful of holiday decorations, some old Christmas tubs for my grandma, and a beat-up recliner I kept meaning to haul away. Because of that, we never bothered locking the exterior door. Down there, you'll also find our working hot water heater and an old disconnected one that the landlord said had been left behind ages ago. A couple more details that matter. The backyard is fully fenced, and I have a miniature Australian Shepherd who freely comes and goes through a dog door while we're at work. He's the friendliest dog imaginable, barks initially at strangers, but a kind word or two, and he'd practically welcome anyone in like family. No real guard dog instincts there. Also in the yard was an abandoned chicken coop from a previous owner. Not our current landlord, but the one before him. Everything changed one evening when I pulled into the driveway after work. Our neighbor, the cop dad, approached me cautiously. He described how a man in a red pickup truck had driven up, hopped out, and started fiddling with the gate to get into the backyard. Naturally, the neighbor confronted him, since he knew it wasn't me, my roommate, my boyfriend, or anyone else connected to us. The stranger's excuse? He claimed he needed to check the serial number on the hot water heater in our basement. The neighbor told him to leave and return only when someone was home. At that point, I figured it might be our landlord. He drives a red truck, and perhaps he'd forgotten to mention a visit. I texted him right away. It wasn't the landlord. After some messages back and forth with both the landlord and neighbor, we pieced it together. The man was the previous owner of the house. We'll just call him Jim. The landlord said he'd reached out to Jim to sort out what he wanted and why he'd shown up unannounced. But the landlord couldn't get in touch with Jim, and days passed without another sighting. We thought that was the end of it. Then, one afternoon, while I was on my lunch break at work, sitting in my car, my doorbell camera pinged. I checked the feed and saw two detectives from a completely different state standing at my door. They were searching for Jim. Why? He had legal active warrants for stolen firearms and various illegal substances, and our address was still listed in their files as connected to him. I explained the recent driveway incident, and the detectives immediately suspected he'd stashed something incriminating in our basement and was trying to retrieve it discreetly. They advised me to install a lock on the basement door right away, noting how easy it would be to hop the short fence, especially since we rarely went down there. Those massive spiders were a strong deterrent. Before local police could coordinate a full search, Jim popped up twice more. First, my doorbell camera captured him. He rang the bell, pounded on the door, and there was his red truck parked behind him. The footage was blurry and low quality since the battery was dying, but it was clearly him. Second, he apparently contacted the landlord directly, now claiming he just wanted to remove the old chicken coop from the yard. A completely different story from what he told the neighbor. Soon after, I came home to find the chicken coop's door pried open and its contents rummaged through. My little Aussie definitely wasn't responsible for that. We locked the basement as suggested, and eventually, detectives, with local help, thoroughly searched the yard, basement, and that massive crawl space. They turned up nothing. Paperwork was signed, the landlord removed the chicken coop, and we figured the ordeal was over. But no. We live in an area prone to severe weather, including tornadoes. One morning after a stormy night, not a tornado but with strong winds, my roommate and I were outside with the dog, surveying the yard. She glanced at the house, paused, and asked, "Was that basement window always broken?" It wasn't. Fuming, I unlocked the basement door and stormed in. Not my wisest move in hindsight. Everything had been disturbed. The recliner shoved aside, Christmas tubs pried open with decorations scattered, and even the old empty hot water heater was dragged around. By this point, detectives, my family, friends, and even my boyfriend had all poked around down there looking for hidden items. But we found zilch. Clearly, Jim was skilled at concealing whatever he had. I called the local police again. The out-of-state detectives couldn't act directly without local involvement, so I looped in my new cop contacts from afar. A local officer agreed, glanced at the window, declared it wind damage from the storm, propped the glass back in place and left, completely dismissing the obvious signs of rummaging in our prior break-in reports. For the record, a few months later, an actual tornado hit nearby, and a tree toppled into our yard. All upstairs windows survived just fine. But sure, officer, blame the wind. After this final intrusion, my roommate and I had a long talk and came to some pragmatic conclusions. One, he couldn't access the main house without contorting through the tiny dog door, which would be hilariously impressive even if he tried. Plus, he seemed focused solely on whatever he'd hidden downstairs, not on us or our belongings upstairs. Two, local police weren't taking it seriously, so escalating felt pointless and exhausting. Three, he likely retrieved whatever he needed during that last break-in via the window, so he'd move on to a new hiding spot. Four, nothing valuable was stored in the basement. Anyway, if he wanted my grandma's vintage ornaments, fine, take them. And five, he hadn't harmed or let out the dog, who either befriended him, traitor, or relentlessly barked, nipped, and tried to herd him around the yard. Either way, Jim wasn't coming out ahead in that matchup. In the end, this sneaky previous owner had been sneaking into our basement repeatedly, and our attempts to get real help fell flat. It's been about 8 months now, with no sign of him returning, though he's proven elusive, so who knows for sure. I think we're finally in the clear. So, Jim, if you're out there reading this, please find somewhere else for your questionable stash. I'm just trying to live my life here. You clearly have no intent to harm us, which I appreciate. But stay out of the main house and leave my dog alone. He'd probably come right back to you anyway, if you took him. Let's not ever meet again. I'm a 22-year-old woman now, but this happened just over a year ago when I was 21. I live in a quiet little town that's basically asleep by midnight. Think a couple of pubs, a handful of corner stores, a bank, and not much else. I work shifts at one of those pubs right in the center, and my walk home was always straightforward, about 8 or 9 minutes along dimly lit streets, passing one of the shops with its empty bus shelter out front. Buses stop running around 8 p.m. anyway. Even through a stretch of residential roads until I reached my house near the end. The town felt safe enough that I'd never worried about walking alone at night. It was peaceful, especially late, with no one around and that deep silence I actually enjoyed. This all went down on New Year's Eve, bleeding into New Year's Day. The pubs stayed open extra late for the celebrations, so my shift ran until around 1:30 a.m. After closing up, my boss, my boyfriend, a couple of coworkers, and I headed next door to the other pub for a few drinks and to unwind. We were having a good time reminiscing about the busy holiday season when I glanced at the clock and saw it was pushing 2:30 a.m. I knew I had to head home. My boyfriend lives across town, and I wasn't crashing at his place that night. Both he and my boss offered to see me home. My boss even said he'd drive me, but everyone was still chatting and laughing, so I didn't want to drag anyone away. My boyfriend insisted on walking me, but I brushed it off. I'd done this route 100 times. It was literally minutes away, and I was looking forward to that quiet stroll with a cigarette. No headphones, just decompressing after a long shift. They weren't thrilled, but after some back and forth, I said my goodbyes and set off alone. The streets were deserted, just as I'd expected. I didn't see a single soul until I approached that shop and the bus shelter beside it. As I got nearer, around 3 a.m. by now, I spotted a figure sitting on the bench inside the shelter. Even though the pubs had technically closed, ours had stayed open privately for staff, so it wasn't completely shocking to see someone out. I recognized him vaguely. He'd been in my pub earlier that evening, one of the customers I had served. He seemed harmless enough at the time, just a guy in his 30s unwinding. As I passed, he looked up and I noticed he was snorting something off his keys. Cocaine, most likely. He caught my eye, and since I was smoking, he called out politely enough. "Excuse me, love. Got a light I could borrow?" I paused, maybe not the smartest move, and started rummaging in my bag for one of my spare lighters. I figured I'd just hand it over and keep moving. No need to linger with a stranger high at this hour. He was already closing the distance as I stopped, and then he asked for a cigarette too. I told him truthfully that the last one in my mouth was my last. Throughout this quick exchange, he was standing uncomfortably close, and suddenly I felt exposed, alone on an empty street, far enough from the pub that no one would hear or see anything. There were no houses nearby yet, just darkness ahead. I mumbled something about keeping the lighter and that I had to go, starting to turn away. But he said, "Hang on a sec." And for some reason, I froze again. I know now I should have just kept walking, but part of me worried that brushing him off abruptly might set him off. That's when everything shifted. His tone changed completely. He scanned me head to toe, and with a chilling edge, he said, "I've been furious all night, just waiting for someone to take it out on. You really shouldn't be out here by yourself like this." My stomach dropped, and my legs went weak. I had no idea if my phone was even accessible in my pocket or buried in my bag. Panicking, I glanced around and forced a smile, blurting out, "I'm not alone. My boyfriend's just around the corner waiting for me. I'll be with him any second." Total lie, of course. My boyfriend was still back at the pub. He smirked like he saw right through me and announced he'd walk me to meet this imaginary boyfriend. I protested. "No need. I'm fine." But he was already right behind me, trailing closely as I started walking faster toward home. He rambled incoherently that I didn't understand him, that he needed me to walk with him, that he wouldn't hurt me specifically. All I could think was that at any moment, he might grab me, yank my hair, or drag me off the path. And sooner or later, he'd realize there was no boyfriend waiting. I fumbled for my phone, managed to pull it out, and miraculously, it unlocked to our work group chat. I frantically typed a quick message about a strange man following me home. Then I noticed the battery at 2% and prayed someone would see it. I didn't dare try calling anyone. He was muttering now about how I wasn't paying attention to him. We turned the corner onto my actual street, and by some stroke of luck, he didn't call my bluff about the boyfriend. Or if he knew, he didn't mention it. But his behavior grew even worse. Crude, leering comments about me being a pretty young thing, and how my boyfriend probably didn't know how to take care of me properly. I stayed silent, walking as fast as I could without running, discreetly checking my dying phone. Then it hit me. He was going to see exactly which house was mine. My dad would be asleep at the back, oblivious. I couldn't lead this guy straight to my door. Scanning the row of similar houses, I spotted one further up with a light on in the window. Each had a little gate and short path to the front door. I veered toward it, opened the gate, turned to him with a forced cheerful, "This is me. Thanks for the company. Bye," and clicked the gate shut behind me. I hurried up the path, jammed my house key into the stranger's lock, praying he wouldn't notice or wait to see if the door opened, and stood there pretending to let myself in. He lingered for a moment, then thankfully turned and shuffled off in the opposite direction, back the way we'd come. The second he was far enough away, I bolted out of that gate and sprinted the rest of the way to my real house. I heard him notice and start following again, but I reached my door first. In my panic, I didn't realize my dad had left his key in the inside lock, meaning I couldn't get in. My phone had died completely by then. I just pounded on the door until, after what felt like forever, my dad woke up and let me in. I made it inside safely. Nothing physical happened that night, thank God, but it shook me to my core. I haven't walked home alone at night since, and my boyfriend still feels guilty for not insisting harder. To the random man who followed me that night, admitting he'd been looking for someone to harm, let's never cross paths again. It's been about 4 years since that night, yet the memory remains vivid, etched into my mind as if it all unfolded just yesterday. The direct quotes here are his exact words. I shared this experience with a close friend soon after, while every detail was still raw and clear. I'd recently relocated to a different state and was eager to meet new people and explore the dating scene. That's when I created a profile on OkCupid. Before long, I connected with a guy, let's just call him Justin, who had also just arrived in the area. We hit it off online and arranged to meet for dinner at a nearby bar and grill. The evening went wonderfully. Justin was charming and engaging, standing at an impressive 6'6" with a strong rural vibe. He felt like a refreshing change from the urban crowd I'd encountered. I was already looking forward to a second date. After eating, we strolled through the downtown area for a while, enjoying the night air. He then suggested heading back to his house for a nightcap. Since I'd had a few drinks and didn't want to drive, I accepted his offer to take me in his truck. When we arrived at his place, he went upstairs to mix some cocktails while I, out of curiosity, asked to see the basement, something I'd never experienced growing up. I admit I was a bit trusting back then. Once he returned with the drinks, we headed to his bedroom to chat more comfortably. We sat on the bed and the conversation turned to his time in the military. He remained polite and attentive, but he began arguing me repeatedly to finish my drink. As I lifted the glass to my lips, I spotted a layer of pinkish powder settling at the bottom. I paused, examining it closely, assuming it was residue from a dirty glass. Noticing my hesitation, he quickly said, Oh, I've only used that cup for water. It's fine." I took a cautious sip anyway, and the taste was overwhelmingly bitter, reminiscent of dissolving medicine that's been left too long on the tongue. My instincts screamed to dump it out, but not wanting to seem impolite, I continued with tiny sips whenever he pressed me. To keep the talk going, I asked about his developments and whether he'd ever had to take a life. His expression brightened dramatically, like he'd been waiting for that question. "Hell yeah, and I enjoyed every minute of it," he replied. enthusiastically, then launched into graphic details. Unease crept in strongly at that point, and I desperately wanted to leave, but my car was still parked downtown. He went on to mention that even in his hometown in Montana, he'd been involved in some dark incidents, explaining that things happen in the country, and it's a place where the law doesn't always hold up. By now, I was starting to feel lightheaded and foggy from whatever I'd ingested, so I set the glass aside and said I wasn't interested in drinking more. Out of nowhere, he asked about my biggest fear. After I shared it, he remarked casually, "Oh, weird. Most women fear being raped by someone they've just met." I was stunned, silent, but he chuckled and shifted back to his friendly persona, steering us toward lighter topics. As we talked, I reclined on the bed for a moment and felt something dark beneath the pillow. A handgun. His tone darkened immediately. He claimed it was just for self-defense, but added that he'd love to fuck a woman at gunpoint someday. He picked it up and toyed with it absent-mindedly, sending chills all through me. I was certain this was how my life would end. Assaulted and killed. It had taken all these red flags for the full panic to hit, partly because his roommates had been home earlier, which had made me felt somewhat secure. Then he confessed his ultimate fantasy: to abduct a stranger, hold her captive as a sex slave, and eventually murder her. He described it with such visible excitement that I didn't doubt his sincerity for a second. Trapped and paralyzed with terror, I glanced at my phone. My battery was nearly dead and frantically brainstormed ways to escape. At 5 feet 4 inches and no match for his built ex-military frame, fighting him off seemed damn near impossible. He lay down beside me and began touching me inappropriately. I froze completely, unable to react. Suddenly, we heard noises. His roommates returning home, their footsteps echoing through the house. His attitude flipped instantly. He grew distant, got up, and announced he was driving me back to my car. Relief washed over me like nothing I'd ever felt when I spotted my vehicle waiting outside the bar. I drove aimlessly for a bit afterward, checking my mirrors to ensure he wasn't tailing me. Then, immediately blocked and removed every trace of him from my contacts. Looking back, I regret not reporting it to the police, but with no concrete proof of a crime and only my word against his, I doubted anything would come of it. I'm profoundly thankful to have escaped unharmed and pray that his twisted dreams remain nothing more than fantasies. And that, dear listeners, brings a close to these more true, creepier stories. I'd like to take a moment and acknowledge the rest of the membership here on Back to Ashes. Thank you all for your dedication and your loyalty to the channel and your love for me. I love you all right back, and I do my best to get all of the vocal melatonin out that I can just for you. Because if it weren't for you, I wouldn't have a voice and this channel would not exist. I'd be sitting here talking to myself. So thank you all dearly. If you are sleeping, I hope Slumberland is treating you comfortably. If you are awake, I hope you've enjoyed these selections. In the meantime, please stay vigilant and keep yourself safe. I'll be reading to you soon. Have yourselves a good morning, a good afternoon, or a good evening. Peace, love, and light to you all.